Welcome to Hello Main Street, where we talk about thought provoking tips, tricks, and ideas for fellow entrepreneurs just like you. So, we have today with us a special guest, and we are going to be talking about combating burnout. And as CEOs and business owners, we know this all too well. So, please help me to welcome Jaymes O'Pheron, and he is the owner of Catalytic Conversations. So, thank you so much, Jaymes. Give us a little bit of backstory about yourself and then how you went down this road.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I started out as a freelance web developer. I was successful in helping to build up that particular industry and that particular career. And I started burning out, as so frequently happens. A large part of that experience was due to a lot of the loneliness and isolation that came out of, working independently, away from a team, also being a bachelor at the time. We're just kind of hunkered down in my room doing nothing except for coding. Is not particularly good for anyone's mental health.
Sure.
Most especially not mine. And out of me working to try and solve that problem, I ended up migrating out of that industry entirely into coaching. I had found some really nice satisfaction with coaching other people in coding, and I realized that I could solve some more problems beyond just that. So I was initially doing communications coaching for engineers because engineers need communication skills too. Sometimes especially. And I've been through a lot of pivots since then. I discovered how big of an issue burnout was among remote workers. So I helped remote workers a lot with burnout for a while. And then most recently, I've been finding my niche in specifically helping founders, my fellow entrepreneurs, CEOs, and executives to help them with the challenges that burnout faces for them.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So I put down below, I put your website. So if somebody wants to go there, they can. And what I really like is that we had talked a couple weeks back, well, maybe about a month or so ago. And so it was really interesting, right? Because I've heard about people say, oh, yeah, I burned out. And I never quite knew what that was until you and I had the conversation about, we kind of shut ourselves away, right? Like I'm an extrovert. And it just felt like in December, it was like, okay, I am like just kind of hunkering down, kind of setting myself out of the social realm. And I really didn't want to do a lot or have a lot to conversate about. And that's typically not like me. And so my question to myself was, is this what burnout is? Because we don't really talk about like specific
Mhm.
signs of it, right? And people talk about burnout, but it can be very generalized. So that's when we started having that conversation. And I really feel like this is something, especially we talk about isolation, feeling alone in our business and things like that, no one to really bounce it off of. And that can really kind of eat and weigh at you over time. Um,
Mm.
so, how do
Understood.
you help people to understand or recognize when they are in that situation? And how can you help them to prevent from getting there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot that can be impacted in that. Like you're describing, burnout is something that we don't really popularly understand very well. We tend to conflate both burnout and stress together as the same kind of thing. Or sometimes we will have this picture of burnout as this thing out in the future. That's when things get really bad. And like I just completely give up and my business crashes and I go, put myself in a hospital kind of an idea. I guess that's
Right.
down the road. I'm not there yet. But really what it comes down to, no one's ever there yet. Well,
Yeah,
until they
thank
are.
goodness.
But really, I like to differentiate stress from burnout in particular, because stress is something that happens to you. Stress is something that is putting you under load. It's a challenge that you're facing, and we don't have any control over that, right? Burnout is a unhelpful or unwholesome response or reaction to stress.
Okay.
It's a mismanagement of stress, effectively. It's the negative impacts that happen, but not just any negative impact, because we learn from failures, we learn from mistakes, we grow from all these things, right?
Sure.
But burnout ultimately is failure that we haven't learned from, so we
Mm,
don't grow from, because stress is that hardship that we're supposed to grow from. If we
sure.
fail to grow from it, burnout is the result. So my whole goal is to not help people avoid stress, because that's avoiding life. There's no way of making an impact in the world or doing anything worthwhile without
Yeah.
stress. So avoiding stress is not the solution. The goal is to convert stress into growth instead of burnout. right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
recognizing the symptoms of burnout, recognizing in your life, even at low levels, and working to try and minimize that burnout allows you to actually lean into stress more effectively, more healthfully, and make more of an impact. So there's three different components of burnout that you have to recognize and be able to distinguish between. One of them we've already talked about quite a bit, and that's the isolation. It's the disconnection. It's that what I call alienation. It's a sense that you are dehumanizing the people around you to some degree. You're holding them at arm's length. You are more irritable than usual. Miscommunications are happening more frequently. All these kinds of things are happening. And that's a component of burnout. And that is not the same thing as being an introvert. Introverts also struggle with this. Introverts need humans as well. Need a certain amount of peopling, a certain amount of socialization, and sometimes in a different way, and different amounts, and so on. But they do need it. And extroverts, sometimes it's easier to notice when an extrovert starts acting like an introvert. Then that's a really key indicator that they're struggling with a certain level of burnout. Introverts will manifest in different ways. Each personality is going to manifest in slightly different symptoms and so on. But overall,
Yeah.
you're seeing a large change in your normal pattern of healthy behavior interaction with other people, but specifically, increased miscommunications, increased irritableness, these kinds of things. That's more of your alienation side of things. The other two components are.
I agree with you on that piece as far as the short-temperedness, right? Because usually, like my husband will always tell me that everybody gets the good side, and then when I come home, I'm like, I just shut down. I'm quiet. I'm very curt, and so I have to be mindful of that. But I
Yeah.
did notice that when you talk about being short-tempered, right? Somebody had said something to me out, another business owner, and I immediately like jumped back, like snap back, and I'm like, that
Defensiveness.
usually is not my go-to, but I'm usually, pretty reserved and very bubbly, and or so I think anyways.
Right. It's a defensive
And it
mindset.
was,
It's a survival
yeah,
framework where you're thinking about preserving and surviving rather than
yeah,
collaborating and communing, right?
yeah,
And the dangerous thing there, and this is true of all the burnout symptoms, but burnout in general, but in particular this one, burnout specifically cripples our ability to communicate, our ability to connect, our ability to empathize. It also cripples our ability to be creative, our ability to learn, all of these kinds of things, which if you're an executive, if you're a founder, if you're an entrepreneur, that's your bread and butter. You have to be brilliant on demand. You have to solve problems. You have to work through these things. You have to communicate. You have to sell. You have to manage. You have to do all these things. And burnout is completely crippling your ability to do any of them. Right? It's an absolutely essential component of success to be able to manage and hopefully eliminate burnout.
yeah, yeah. And so give us another tip. Sorry, I had interjected, but I just kind of want
Yeah,
people
yeah.
to know and to recognize when those do
Right.
happen.
So I talked about alienation. So the other two components are overwhelm and inadequacy, also known as inefficacy. So overwhelm, we're very familiar with. It's the most visible of the three types. It's the one that we tend to complain about the most, and typically manifests of like not feeling like you have enough time to go around in the day, as a sense of rushing every which direction. You don't have clarity on what the next steps to take. You end up doing way more multitasking than you really should be doing, which that's a lot of us now, or all of us nowadays. We're always pressured to multitask, which is a burnout type behavior pattern. So not knowing what to do next and having feels like there's just too much on your plate and not enough time in the day to go around. That's the overwhelm side of things. And really, honestly,
And
actually doesn't do with how much work it is. It's how you're relating to it, how organized it is. Really.
So Jaymes, so I'm gonna circle back to what you said, because I'm the type of person that I will, and I'm gonna show you my little notes here. I tend to jot notes, right? And I like to scratch things off.
Yep.
And I noticed that even though I had it written down, again, it was another telltale sign that, but I didn't know what I know now, right? And I'm like, okay, I have it written down, and I'm like, I just don't know even where to get started or how to tackle it. And it would just, like you said, feel overwhelmed, where I was like, I just need to just shut myself down and just walk away, because I'm usually can do tasks and keep going, but I just couldn't do it. So that was
Yeah,
very interesting. So thanks. I wanted
absolutely.
to recognize that.
100%. And one of the aspects of that too is that one, getting all down, written down, and having clarity on what needs to happen is absolutely
Sure.
essential. Then breaking those down in a way that you know what the next steps are is the next aspect of clarity of that. So you have bite-sized pieces, so you know what your first steps are. But also there's another loop to this, and that is that there's a little bit of the tip there for you there. We have like this loop of creativity, right? We take inputs, we process that input, and then we're able to create off of that. All creation is reorganization and reformation of things. And so you have to have input in order to have an output, but you also have to be able to process that input. It's like you have to eat in order to build muscle, but you also have to digest what you just ate, right? You have to, all three of those have to happen. And so when so much in our society, we're very focused on tons of stimulation, tons of intake, and then tons of productivity and output. But we have completely forgotten about and excluded from our natural rhythms of our society all of the processing aspects of life. We see taking a nap as being lazy rather than being productive, when it actually is, because as living things, when you are giving life, that is what you are supposed to be producing, is life. And so being productive is anything that is life-giving. And taking a nap is life-giving. You are nourishing yourself. You're
Jaymes,
processing.
I'm a big nap taker.
I am on a campaign to destigmatize naps. They are so essential, so important for learning. All the different things similar and related to that, whether it's relaxing, reading a book, shutting off, not taking an input, giving yourself time to digest mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, super important. And if you don't have that, no matter how much clarity you have on what you need to do, you're never going to be able to process it enough to find out what needs to happen next, or be able to prioritize it, or have that creativity to have an output that's going to solve their problems. So you need to have all three of those in balance.
And I really appreciate that, because like you said, talking about naps. So when I was getting my bachelor's degree, I was working full-time, being a mom full-time, and going to school full-time. And so in order for me to like be able to have enough energy for learning capabilities, I would come home, I'd eat. I'm like, okay, give myself a half an hour to at least sleep, and then and like reset myself to keep moving. And so many people will be like, I don't know how you can take a nap, but for me, it's refreshes my mind to be able to have that clarity. So I am fortunate. There's some people like my husband. He's like, if I take a nap, I'm done for the rest of the day. Like, he can't function. So I feel fortunate that I can be those cat nappers and be refreshed and ready to go again. So
there is a skill to it. There's some science around like what stage of sleep you go through, and when to wake up, and how to strategize it in your rituals for getting into sleep and when you're waking up in order to do that effectively. There's a whole lot involved in there, but it is definitely a very powerful skill. So that was the first two. So alienation, overwhelm. The third one is inadequacy, or like I said, inefficacy. And the best way to define that, I found, is a lack of a sense of meaningful accomplishment. A lack of a sense of meaningful accomplishment. And there's, of course, multiple components to that. You have to be able to actually sense and be tangibly connected in a proximal way to that meaningful accomplishment. You can have a meaningful accomplishment, but if you don't like sit with it, if you don't connect with it, particularly if you're working like digitally, like writing code or something like that never feels to end, there's no like sensation of that accomplishment. And so you end up with struggles with being able to register and celebrate and have it stick with you, right? And so you end up with not being able to register and feel a sense of accomplishment from what you actually did. There's also a lack of accomplishment itself, where you're not making progress, and that can be absolutely killing to your motivation. That's really what motivation is at the heart of inadequacy. That sense of lack of confidence. And then the sense of lack of meaningful accomplishment. You can be making progress, you can be sensing it, but if it's not meaningful to you, if it's not in a relational context around a sense of purpose and belonging in community, it's meaningless. And so you're not going to have that, and you're going to end up with burnout. So one of the most common symptoms you'll see here, of course, is imposter syndrome, right? Because we're struggling with that, or a lack of motivation, procrastination, all these different kinds of, wanting to do something, but then just not having the emotional oomph to do it. You may have perfect clarity on what it is. You're not overwhelmed. You just like, I just don't want to. And it may not be a lack of discipline. It's just you don't feel like you have the confidence of being able that it would be worth anything if you did it. Because you don't have any evidence. You don't have any experiential evidence that it would make a difference if you did move forward with that action, right? So when you start tracking your successes, if you start being able to create more, that you're moving in the right direction, seeing that sense of progress, making it more proximal to you, whether tracking more frequently, in smaller bites, celebrating in a tangible way, getting more realistic, meaningful feedback from people around you. These are all different ways that you can work, try, and reduce this particular kind of burnout. So ultimately, breaking it all down, you've got your relationality and your connection, you've got your clarity, and you've got your motivation. And those are these three components that if you focus on those three and develop robust systems around those, you will have the tools to be able to encounter stress without it turning into burnout. And you'll be able to do a whole lot more than other people around you. You'll be able to be more energetic, have joyful productivity, not the crazy busy kind of productivity we find ourselves stuck in so often nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I like it, Jaymes, that you talk about procrastination, because I am not a big procrastinator, but I do realize I acknowledge when I am find a whole bunch of other things to do other than what I've written down on my plate. And some things I have to like mentally talk myself through it. Like, why are you, trying to wash the dishes and fold the clothes when you should be sitting at your desk and like really going down and what is it that's preventing me, from just diving into it? And sometimes it's not really imposter syndrome for me, but it was more like, I'm not sure what my next conversation, how it should go or how it should flow. And having that, my own resistance, right? And it's like, it's not going to kill me if I have this conversation. It's so funny because you have to sometimes psych yourself out for some of these things that you have to do as a business owner.
I have to comment on that real quick, though, because if you are procrastinating from a conversation, you don't have clarity on how it should go by cleaning, that's actually a very, very natural pattern because that's overwhelm, right? Lack of clarity on what how it's going to relate to it. And you're not sure what's going to happen. So a lot of unknowns, right? Yeah. But then cleaning is one of the best ways to remove overwhelm because you're tidying your space. And when you tidy your space, it actually tidies your mind. It creates more clarity. So washing the dishes is actually very therapeutic in a lot of different dimensions for burnout. So ideally, washing by hand, actually. If you wash dishes by hand, a physical, tangible aspect of it, the little small wins from each dish, also the inadequacy, you're being kind to your future self, and you're living with somebody who would also appreciate it. So there's a human connection there as well. Alienation. It's actually an amazing thing. I prescribe it quite frequently for my clients. Go wash the dishes by hand.
That's a lot. That's great, Jaymes. I love that. That means I'm on the right track. Well, that's awesome because that's how I do it. I'll either get on the treadmill and just go, or I'll clean, and I just have to clean until the room is tidy and all of that, and then I'm like, okay, now that all the space is ready, now I'm ready. All right. Okay, great. Well, I love that. So if you're interested in speaking further with Jaymes, this is his information right here, and they can text you or they can call you, right, Jaymes?
Yep.
Okay,
prefer
great.
text or call. Knock on the door a little bit first. Make sure I'm available. I have a lot of meetings all the time. Yeah. I love to hear from you.
And then here's also your website. On your website, can they go ahead and just schedule a time to chat with you if they wanted to?
Absolutely. Got my Calendly link on there. Got upcoming events and all that kind of stuff coming up as well.
Okay, that would be great. So there you go. This is Jaymes' information. Thank you, Jaymes, so much for being on here with me. And as always, do me a favor, hit subscribe, like this, share it with other business owners. It's really important that we have that tribe, have that community around us. You don't have to be alone because so many of us are going down that same path. It's just we're all in different lanes, but all still experiencing similar situations. And so here is my information down below. So if you want to connect with me, please feel free to do so. Monica Sanchez, B2B, and that is on LinkedIn. Thank you guys so much. And Jaymes, thank you so much for your time. I always appreciate having conversations with you.
My pleasure. Same.